What's up, Big Ten fans? Michael Dugan here from internsbig10.com. Like I tweeted, there will be no show this week. Instead, you get these reaction videos. Charlie traveling back from Tuscaloosa to Columbia, Missouri. He was covering Alabama and Mizzou, so we'll ask him about that when we talk later this week on the show. But for now, you get these reaction videos because we got to talk about what happened, and a lot happened. And we'll start with Minnesota versus Ohio State. A lot of you were probably confused with the way this game went. Ohio State needed a pretty strong fourth quarter to seal this one away. It was a lot closer than what the score indicates, I'll tell you that. Although the score was a two-possession game. Dwayne Haskins was great, 400 yards passing, 3 touchdowns, no turnovers. Ohio State running the ball is usually great. We think they have 2 All-American caliber running backs. Neither of them looked like they were even all-conference first or second team. Weber and Dobbins both averaged less than 4 yards a carry. Neither found the end zone. I was a little surprised at seeing that. I'm not sure how Minnesota got it done, making up for their lack of size up front, but they played Ohio State well, and I'm starting to think Ohio State might be vulnerable. They may be coasting into the end of the season. I know they always bring it against Michigan, but Michigan is playing with a chip on their shoulder for the first time in almost 2 years. And this Ohio State team kind of looks like it's coasting. Granted, the last 2 games were against Indiana and Minnesota at home, so I'm not too concerned about the Buckeyes yet. But if they keep this up, they've got enough. They've got Michigan State, and they've got Michigan, and they had Penn State, and I mean, they'll have some tough games left on the schedule. I don't know what's going to come of this, but Ohio State looks right now not like they can hang with anyone in the country. They can hang with most teams in the country. I don't think they can hang with Alabama if they keep playing like this. I don't know what's going on, but I don't like it if I'm Ohio State. I know they have the talent. I know their coaching staff is great, so I trust that they'll get it together. But what I've seen the last 2 weeks is extremely worrisome. But I trust they'll get it together, so I'm putting them on they're okay for now, but there are red flags that are starting to show up a little bit. Penn State, season's over. They're 1-2 in the Big Ten. I know they were playing this year for a Big Ten championship, but it's mid-October. They're below 500 in the Big Ten. I don't know where they're going to be in the college football playoff poll, but Miles Sanders was great in this game. Brian Lewerke from Michigan State, he got it done because they won the football game, but he had almost 30 incompletions. So I look at that and I say, how in the world does Penn State let that happen? With Brian Lewerke, he was 24 of 52. He had 28 incompletions. It's less than 50% passing. Trace McSorley was not that great. He was 19 of 32. He did not throw an interception. He spread the love, but he did lose a fumble. And this was one of those games where Miles Sanders showed up, but Trace McSorley did not, and it just goes to show that he is by far the most valuable player in the Big Ten Conference. I don't think anybody would dispute that, but when he's not playing well, I think Penn State really shows its vulnerability, and I don't know how relevant that is right now because I don't think they're in the hunt for the college football playoff anymore. Even if they run the table, they've got 2 losses, both of which are at home. Whoever they play in the Big Ten Championship, if they even get there, which is going to take a whole lot of craziness to happen. Ohio State's going to have to lose 3 games now, and Michigan State's going to have to keep losing if Penn State wants to find themselves in Indianapolis, which I think we all know that's not happening. But Charlie and I can dissect this and what this means for James Franklin, but I think that loss for James Franklin meant more than just what could happen this season because it showed that without Trace McSorley, a guy that's been balling for the Nittany Lions for 3 years now, when he doesn't show up, that team's in trouble. Despite Miles Sanders going for almost 10 yards a carry, that team's in trouble without him. So that's a big red flag for Penn State for me for the rest of this year. I don't know. I mean, that's how they follow up that loss to Ohio State. James Franklin going off on a student, going off in the press conference, and they lay that kind of egg. Charlie and I will talk about that at length this week, but I was extremely disappointed in Penn State. And Michigan State didn't blow me away. Like I said, Brian Lewerke was not great. Felton Davis is probably one of the best receivers in the Big Ten for sure, but certainly one of the most underrated receivers I think in the country. I saw him play in Bloomington a few weeks ago. That kid's really good. But Brian Lewerke Michigan State didn't really blow me away either. So there's a lot to talk about there. Charlie and I will get to that on the podcast, I promise you. Michigan, Wisconsin, I'm not really surprised. I thought Michigan was going to win this game. I was really confident in that. Shea Patterson wasn't that great, but Michigan got the run game going, and that's what matters for Michigan. Karan Higdon, again, not less than 20 carries for over 100 yards. That's tremendous. It's a pretty good Wisconsin defense. This is not the same Wisconsin team that was last year for some reason. I don't know why that is because they returned a lot on that offensive line. They're super banged up, the Badgers are, so I get that. But this is a good win for Michigan. It's not great, but it is a good win. I'll give Jim Harbaugh that. Again, I think Wisconsin's probably going to finish with 3 losses. They're not going to be ranked after that loss, so I don't know how great of a win that really is for Michigan. Yes, they won by 25 points, but in terms of the caliber of the opponent, that's not even close to what they're going to see against Ohio State. They play Michigan State this week. I'll get into that on my weekly preview videos on Friday, and Charlie and I will talk about that. But I don't think this was a great win for Michigan. It's a good win, but it's not a tier 1 win. It's kind of the wins that Notre Dame's been piling up. It's not a tier 1 win for Michigan, but they did look really good in a lot of ways. We'll get to that later. We'll dive into that game for sure because that was the highlight of the week. We'll dive into that on the podcast. Rutgers, Maryland, not much to talk about. Ty Johnson with the most Ty Johnson stat line of all time. 9 carries, 132 yards, and a touchdown. The kid's amazing. Good win for Maryland. I think they could go bowling for sure. They're 4-2 right now. They got some tough games left, but I think they're good enough to go bowling. Iowa, Indiana, that was Nate Stanley's best game of the season. I was impressed by Iowa. Everything that they struggled with going into that game, they did well. Nate Stanley was remarkably consistent. He was throwing balls on a line. That offensive line was getting fantastic push against an Indiana front seven that has had some success against teams this year. Not a ton, but some pretty good success against some teams. Virginia, who just knocked off Miami, they had great job up front there. But Iowa looked really good. They did. It's a shame they lost to Wisconsin because I think that's an Iowa team where if they had won that game, they could put up a fight in the Big Ten Championship because that's a physical Iowa team. They grew a lot on Saturday, and I was really impressed, like I said. Going into what I said, I thought Indiana could have won that game because Iowa's running game hadn't been great all year against great teams. Their offensive line was not the same as it was, and the defense wasn't as solid. They found life in all 3 of those on Saturday, some more consistently than others, but they found life in all 3 phases of the football game in that sense. And it's something they hadn't really done with consistency up until that point. So I wasn't wrong at the time, but I have to go back and say that that's no longer the truth. I was a pretty good football team right now, and they grew a lot on Saturday against a Big Ten opponent in Indiana who is in a free fall right now. I don't know what's wrong with them. I think it starts up front. Tom Allen was all over the place on Saturday. Quite literally, he got a couple of sideline warnings, a couple unsportsmanlike conduct penalties. But that Indiana team, they're lost right now. I don't know what they're doing. We'll talk about that as that gets more relevant, but I'm worried for Indiana. We'll save Nebraska Northwestern for last. Purdue looked great. They're rolling right now. David Blau is, granted, that was an Illinois team that was 3-2, but the record might deceive you. They weren't a 3-2 caliber football team. That Illinois team's still really bad. But David Blau looks great. I'm happy for him. He's a gamer. He's coming back from an injury. That's a really good guy, too, off the field. So I'm happy for David Blau. He looks extremely good. Rondale Moore is electrifying. And Jeff Brom's team is clicking right now. Now to a team that's not clicking is Scott Frost, Nebraska. Look, they just looked like a young and inexperienced team. That's what it was. They looked like a young and inexperienced team that was handed a lead on the road. And they struck first, and then it was kind of back and forth from there until the end. And it's not like they jumped out to a 21-0 lead, but they jumped it out. They jumped out to a lead, and Northwestern again can't get the running game going. So what do? Clayton Thorson will throw it 64 times, complete over 40 of them, throw for 455 yards and 3 touchdowns. He threw a couple of picks. They weren't that great, but Flynn Nagel is turning into a guy that is kind of the safety net without a running game. And if you can get it to Flynn Nagel 6 to 8, maybe 9 times a game, I mean, that's almost as good as having a running game, right? If you know you can get it to Flynn Nagel a few times. Having Austin Carr in 2016 for Northwestern was, it was incredible. It was almost like they didn't, they needed a run game, obviously, because they had a great running back in Justin Jackson. But when you've got a guy that you know you're going to get it to 7, 8, 9 times a game, that makes up for a lack of running game. I'm not saying you don't need it, because to win games against legitimate Big Ten teams, you need a running game. But Northwestern can make up for it. They can win these games against these lower-tier Big Ten opponents, of which they're going to play a couple in the Big Ten West. Unfortunately for them, a couple of them are already out of the way, but they can make up for that against some of these Nebraskas, these Purdues, these Minnesotas, these Illinois. They can do that against those teams because of Flynn Nagel. And I can't even count here how many different Northwestern receivers caught a pass from Clayton Thorson. I'll count it out loud right now. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11, 12 different guys caught a pass from Clayton Thorson on Saturday. I'm just going to leave that there. I think this team showed a lot of grit, this Northwestern team. They only got to Adrian Martinez once. Martinez he showed some flashes. I wasn't totally impressed with him, but for a freshman getting thrown into that kind of situation, I thought he looked better than he had most of the entire season. And then Miller for Northwestern obviously was great. Blake Gallagher was fantastic. Troy Williams, Patty Fisher, the usual guys. They stepped up defensively. Montre Hardage was good in coverage. But look, this Northwestern team is impossible to figure out. I'm not going to waste my breath in talking about them because, look, we don't know what the heck they are. They're going to play to the level of their opponent, and they're going to win games like this, and they're going to lose games like this. So I expect this Northwestern, the rest of the season, they're alone in the lead in the Big Ten West right now. I don't know what's going to come of that. Charlie and I, I'm sure, will talk about that because that was probably the game of the week outcome-wise in the Big Ten. So we'll talk about that on the podcast. Thank you guys for tuning in if you made it this far, and we'll talk to you later this week.